Welcome back, everybody. I am wrapping up, the weekday because we're also having interviews in the weekend. So I'm wrapping up the weekdays by speaking to the wonderful Brian Kurlander, who you know from a number of shows, including Cobra Kai. We're kind of on our Cobra Kai binge right now, so a lot of the actors are kind enough to join us. So you remember, Brian playing PJ in season one. We're hoping he comes back in season four. We're starting kind of a pre-show chat about what PJ can do. So welcome to the program, Brian. I guess let's pick it up right there.
Well, thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So yeah, what do we think? Is there a way for PJ to be a part of season four? I know that just to be clear, you do not know whether you're in season four or not. But what would you like to see if PJ were to come back?
Well, I think it would be great if they brought PJ back. And where there's a will, there's a way. And if enough people out there send their letters and notes to Netflix and the producers, perhaps they will want to bring them back. But I think PJ's got some hidden secrets there. I think that they might be interested in finding out about.
Yeah. So let's kind of go back to the beginning of Cobra Kai. It was shot in Atlanta. You're Atlanta, local, and we're gonna dive into all of the Atlanta happenings and how Atlanta kind of became the hotbed that it is now. But it was a YouTube-Red series, so not a lot of people kind of knew about it. It was the YouTube. Okay, all right, fine, on YouTube. How did that audition come about? Did you self-submit, like I know Susan self-submitted, or did you go through your agent? What was that process?
Went through my agent and went into the casting director. I remember it was dark that night, and I had to drive out to a studio and went up to their offices, and I actually saw the actor coming out of his audition for this role. I looked at him and I said, I feel sorry for that guy because this role is mine.
Wow. Okay.
That's the attitude I think you have to have. It's this business, and particularly now, and during COVID, where so many actors from all over the world now are self-taping. Atlanta used to be one of the few predominantly self-tape markets. Now New York and LA and all over the world, casting directors are catching on. It's much easier for them. So, but at that time, when you would walk in, you'd have to psych yourself up and go, I feel sorry for everybody else because this is my role. But I had a great time. I knew the casting director, wonderful casting director here in town at the time. And yeah, that was it. Went in, did my job, and that's all you can do, as an actor. I look at the auditions as the job. My people who I coach, they say, well, I haven't booked a gig, and I said, I really want to play this part. And my response to them is, well, this is your shot. You are playing the part. So play the part, give it whatever you think that you can give to it, and then you got to let the chips fall where they may. So that was the casting process.
Yeah. So, and was there, callbacks, or you landed it after kind of that?
I landed it right after that. I think they knew. The description of the character was not particularly flattering. It was like a semi-attractive man. It's like, if he could be attractive in the right light, I think is what they were looking at. So that was, I was like, oh, okay. Well, at least my wife thinks I'm attractive.
Yeah, well, okay. I was about to mention that this is the type of role that I would be happy to kind of submit for myself. But then I'm not sure if I would agree with the last thing you said. I'm not sure if my wife finds me attractive. So
Oh, I'm sure she does.
I think she does. I've been married for what, 21 years or so. So if she doesn't,
yeah, 22.
Wow. 22 for you?
Yeah.
Very good. Congratulations. That's yeah, being married for that long, again, people who are much older than us are looking at us saying, yeah, whatever, we get to 40 and then we'll talk. But
in our business, 22 years, like that's you're like 50. It's like dog years in our business.
It's not easy. The one thing that I've never had to deal with, and you've actually had a career, whereas I've had a few things that I've done here and there. But I knew fairly early on that, you know what, I never have to have a conversation with my wife about sex scenes or intimate scenes or even kissing, because those are not the types of roles that I would be going out for. So I didn't need to worry about that conversation. Did you ever have to have kind of those conversations?
Funny that you mentioned that. One time, I had an arc on a show, and my wife and I were watching, and I neglected to tell her that one of the scenes was me in a bathrobe surrounded by two sex workers, and in a hotel room doing some naughty things. And so as the show started, we were sitting on the couch, and she's like, "Oh, this is great! I can't wait to see you." And I leaned over to her and I said, "Oh, by the way, there might be a scene in this with me and two other women." She's like, "Excuse me?" Give me that like little dog tilt. And yeah, but they actually did a very nice job of it, and it was not as risque as I had imagined in my mind.
Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, thank goodness.
This business is really interesting. Again, for the people who are watching, you're like, what are you guys talking about? These are the types of conversations that we have to worry about. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank goodness my wife is not in the industry, thank goodness, and but she has a great appreciation for the arts, and I have a rider in my contract. It's called the carry clause, and it prescribes the amount of clothing I am allowed to take off in any given scene, which is pretty much a sweater, and that's it.
Okay. Yeah, that works. That works very well. Yeah, it's going back to Cobra Kai, because you and I can get on this tangent for the next half an hour. What again, you were in season one. Season one, people really didn't even know kind of about the show. I didn't know that the show existed until it went on Netflix. So
yeah, they went to season one and season two, and it YouTube really wanted to get into that space. They just didn't have the content to anchor it, and as great a show as Cobra Kai is, it wasn't the right anchor for YouTube at the time. Plus, YouTube's brand, I think, was working against it in terms of delivering that kind of content. When people want to go to YouTube, they want to see clips like this, not necessarily entire shows, unless they're downloaded, by other folks. So once it went to Netflix, I was shocked. Because all of a sudden my phone starts ringing off the hook, and I'm getting all sorts of messages. Oh, I just saw you on Cobra Kai, and it became this phenomena. And I think because of COVID, that also really worked, in a strange way in its favor to help it become the phenomena that it is.
Absolutely, because again, there was no new content, and thankfully, season 3 was shot before, and you can get it out. And people, are essentially, that's how I started my new year, right? It came out, and I watched the whole thing. I watched season 3 after it came out. So
well, I think Macchio had a lot to do with that. Like I think Billy Zabka and Ralph Macchio were very adamant that after they had shot the first 2 seasons, at season 3, Apple would allow them to just hold it down, because Netflix was one of the places that they originally went to and pitched the show. There were a number of different platforms that they pitched it to, but Netflix was an early. They were on board, which is why they took it right after YouTube let it go.
Yeah, and thank God. I mean, there's so many great shows. I'm dealing with one of those shows, which is a truly great show, Warrior. It was on Cinemax, and then all of the things that happened with Cinemax, and it was supposed to be on there for 6 seasons or longer, and then after 2 seasons, it stopped. So now it's on HBO Max. Hopefully, it gets a wider audience, and then HBO picks it up, because like these types of shows, Cobra Kai, Warrior, they need to be continued. That universe is way too rich in order for it to stop only after 2 seasons. So I'm very happy that Netflix picked it up, and hopefully same sort of success goes with Warrior as well. Yeah. So in terms of your phone ringing off the hook, did that lead again, from working actors' perspective, because this is what kind of the show does, is we speak to, mostly working actors as opposed to, stars that, don't need to kind of go and audition. Did things change for the better for you after the Cobra Kai? Even though again, it's a smaller role,
Yeah,
but
it's interesting. As an actor, I look at
Mhm.
my profession as a large pie with lots of slices.
Yeah,
I don't think there are some actors who are fortunate enough to spend most of their time in the actor slice, where
yeah.
they can make most of their income on that. I teach. I do a lot of theater. Um, I write. So I'd like to be creative in a number of ways. So I spent a lot of my year working in theater
Mhm.
in great professional companies here in Atlanta. As a young actor, I traveled around the country working at regional theaters and off Broadway and Lincoln Center and things like that. And
Yeah.
so that keeps me very enriched and busy. And then uh, the wonderful thing about Cobra Kai, things like Cobra Kai or House of Cards, people see you on it. It helps to add to your bona fides, where other people say, "Oh, he worked on this show. He must be worth his salt." Working with actors like Billy Zabka or Robin Wright, they say, "Oh, they can hold their own," and that's a plus, certainly.
That is true. Because again, it's like uh, a conversation I had with some other actors. It's you go through kind of your arc, and then you hit certain points in your career where people know you, and then you kind of go away in a way from the public eye, and then all of a sudden you're on the show, and it's a co-star or a guest star appearance, and oh my God, you're popular again. It's that interesting thing that happens in our business, even though you're still just as talented, you're still just as qualified, but it's that thing that allows some people to open doors that were not open before.
That's true. It's absolutely true. It's the fickle nature of our business, and you have
Yeah.
to understand that it's cyclical in that way, and you have
Mhm.
to maintain a creative expression in a number of different ways.
Perfect, and that's exactly what I wanted to transfer to, and you said it because a lot of actors that are specifically just focused on the acting world, a lot of times it's very discouraging, and a lot of times you're going through lean periods where you're not booking, and if you're booking, it may be a co-star role. Well, a co-star role is not going to feed you and keep the lights on, and unless you are, I phrased it this way, Michael Kostroff liked it, so I'm going with it. So my phrase is you're either creative or you're destructive. And destructive, not necessarily in the way of committing suicide type of destructive,
Right.
but destructive is the opposite of creative. Creativity is something that allows us to really feel great about ourselves, is to soar, is to kind of have that energy, flowing. Whereas destructive is the other end of that spectrum of you're feeling down or things are not happening. You start evaluating, and you're not in that proper headspace. So the fact that you're doing theater, the fact that you're doing writing, the fact that you're doing teaching, all of these things, I'm hoping, and it sounds like it, these are things that are allowing you to continue being in that creative space and energized. So opportunities come and go, but you're still in that mode, and it should be hopefully a better way to live.
Well, I like what you said. I phrase it like this: you are either an occupant or an architect, and
True?
um, and so as an architect, you get to build the space, you get to
Yeah.
create what you are doing. The occupant is reliant on somebody else creating the space for them to work within. And that can be a very lonely and soul crushing existence. We learned during COVID that being an occupant in even in one's own home,
Mhm.
is can be difficult. So I've tried to, and it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, to be the architect of the things that I do, and that's been very very helpful. I'm this semester at Emory University. I'm guest lecturing a number of times,
Nice.
teaching Hamlet, because my background is in classical theater. And so I've done a great deal of Shakespeare over the course of my 30 years. And so I get to work with amazing students who are brilliant, a lot smarter than I am. And we get to talk about a subject that I'm incredibly passionate about.
And that's wonderful. Again, kind of going from a theater environment into on screen, because you have the classical background. Do you have a preference? And actually, the question came to me after many interviews, but a question that kind of makes sense in a scenario of you're offered a recurring guest star on a nice show, or you're offered a tour in a theater company. Which one do you take, because you can only choose one?
Okay, well, first of all, it would be harder if somebody offered me a Broadway show versus a tour. Tour is easy. No, I don't want. I'm too old. I don't want to do a tour. But if you were to offer me a great show with a great cast on Broadway versus just a standard recurring on a TV series, although the recurring would be much, much more lucrative, for me, the theater experience is just the most fulfilling experience that I can have creatively.
Yeah, I understand that. There are specific differences, and people talk about the acting aspect of it, right? Of theater, on stage, on screen, and you're much smaller framing, right? A lot happens in the eyes in terms of on screen versus in the theater. What they're not talking about is the way that things are actually shot and things are rehearsed. And on screen, you have, for a co-star or a guest star, you basically have no rehearsal, maybe some rehearsal. Things are shot out of sequence. So in the theater, you have a lot more time to really understand, to dive in, to rehearse, to get into the flow of things, and it's done sequentially. It's done in a linear progression. So it's a much different feel. So I from my perspective, even though I love, my answer would be on screen, because I love kind of everything that's screen related. But I appreciate the process of stage a lot more, because I want to rehearse. I want to get in. I want to try different things. I want to get kind of that feel that you don't usually get, especially with smaller roles that I come up with.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love the process. They're very, very different. And I love the distinction between them. I love the internalization of character, and really allowing, when I talk to young actors, or even very experienced actors that I work with, we talk about breathing. And we talk about the idea of where inspiration comes from. What inspires you? What gets you motivated? What gets you really present? And what I assert is that just breathing, just the act of breathing in, inspires us. It helps us think clearly. And on camera, I notice when I'm on a set, I notice the people who are holding their breath through the entire shot. And it's fascinating how their body tenses up, how their whole mechanism responds to it. Whereas when you just relax into it and allow yourself to breathe, but allow the essence of the essence of the energy of the character. So it's not quite paradoxical, because you got to be relaxed, but you also have to have this energy coming through you, and that comes through your eyes and allows the audience through the lens to see how you're thinking. But that doesn't happen if you're not breathing. And so on stage, you get to breathe because you're speaking so much louder that it requires you to breathe. And you can give off a little more of that frenetic energy in different ways. Whereas on camera, you can't. And so I love playing inside the distinction between the two mediums, because they require, it's like being an athlete. You're either a long distance runner or you're a sprinter, and in our profession, we get to be both sometimes.
Yeah, and again, it's energizing, right? To do one and go back in the other. It's a different muscle that you get to play with. Absolutely. The breathing part is fascinating to me, because again, a lot of the young actors do this. I did this as well. You're so focused, and you're so kind of in your head. Okay, I need to remember my lines. I need to hit my mark. I need to make sure that I don't look at the camera. I like so many things are happening on set that you forget to breathe. And the whole point of being present, and the whole point of being grounded, and the whole point of people who are watching you thinking that this is real life in a way. In real life, we're breathing. Right now, my energy is higher. I'm still breathing as I'm talking. There is no way for me to be believable if it's just it's
Right.
that thing is like we as actors are so into the process that we forget to be real. And breathing is a huge part of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, right. It was like you keep talking about, the Karate Kid. Didn't Miyagi say, breathe in, breathe out, no breathe, no life?
Yeah.
That's a total Cobra Kai thing. You got to
Totally.
breathe, and so that's like that's such a fundamental thing that we don't think about. And you can't think if you're thinking about breathing, you're not in the scene. So it
Yeah.
has to become something of a preparation, so that you just allow yourself to relax into the scene, have confidence. What I love about going on stage sometimes when you're in a long run of a show is I will actively try to forget my lines before I walk on stage. I don't want to know what I like. I don't want to think about a word that I'm saying before I walk on, because it forces me to listen. And I learned that as a young actor in New York. I was going on doing a show off Broadway, and I was thrown into the show 8 days before they opened. It was a Shakespeare play called Cymbeline. It was, reviewed by the New York Times, the Post, and all the Wall Street Journal. So all the major media were coming to review it, and I had to get off book in 5 days, and only have basically 3 days to really work the play without having a book in my hand, and do fights and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was so dependent on my cast, who I trusted implicitly because they were Tony Award winners and amazing actors. And I was was playing the villain in the show, this character of Giacomo, and I relied on them and I listened to them so actively, more so than I'd ever in my career. And it taught me that important lesson of, if you listen, the lines will be there.
Yes.
But the moment you stop listening and go into your head is the moment that all the distractions start rushing in.
Yeah. It's true. I learned a lot. Again, my focus is on screen, but I learned a lot, and I became a far better actor when I did training for theater specifically, because the moment before the Meisner of being present and being kind of focused on the other person, that completely got me out of my head, and I started being freer, then really understood what it meant to be, as opposed to act or to try to pretend like I'm in a scene. So that whole focus and getting grounded became a lot simpler. So I recommend that to everybody, regardless of kind of what they're doing and what their focus is.
Well, I started off as a college athlete. I was not into the arts, and so I wanted to root myself in some fundamentals, because as an athlete, I had these fundamental skills that I had trained for, and that had given me a great deal of success in my sport. And so when I transitioned into the arts, I took a lot of that discipline and focus of foundation building, and I thought, well, for me, I want to start with classical theater, because all of the artists that I truly admired had done, Shakespeare and Shaw and Moliere and Chekhov, and so I wanted to emulate those actors and artists. I saw Alan Rickman on Broadway when I was really young, doing Les Liaisons Dangereuses, and it astounded me. And here I was, this 17-inch neck wrestler, and I walk into the theater with my folks, and I walked out going, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. That was astounding. So
that's amazing, and you're right. Mark Rylance is probably one of my all-time favorite actors.
brilliant.
And yeah, it's all theater before getting on screen and kind of doing the things that I've seen him do. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Going into your wrestling background a little bit. So when did you start wrestling? And I know at 17 you decided you want to be an actor, but how did that kind of transition?
I was a young kid. I had a teacher who took me under his wing and saw that I had potential as a wrestler. And he also saw that wrestling would be a good place for me to be successful. And by being successful there, it would allow me to be successful in other areas of my life. Now, I didn't realize that at the time he was a great teacher and someone who I'm still in contact with to this day.
Nice.
And so when I got to high school, I had gone away to boarding school for a couple of years, and I came back, and the same a teacher had said, he had expected me to go out for the wrestling team, but I had been diving a lot over the course of the subsequent years that I was away. And I really liked diving. And the guys on the swim team said, "Oh, no, I've seen him dive. He's going to be on the diving team." And a bunch of guys, "No, he's going to be on the wrestling team." And I was playing football at the time, and the varsity wrestling coach was the freshman football coach. And he grabbed me by my face mask after practice one day, and he said, "I heard you're going to dive." And I said, "Well, I was thinking about it." And he said, "Well, you can either ride the bench, or you can dive. You can dive and ride the bench, or you can play football." And I was like, "I want to play football." So I ended up saying to the swim team, "Thank you, no thank you." And it was certainly the best decision I ever made.
Okay. So then wrestling, was it Greco-Roman or freestyle? What kind of wrestling?
Well, I competed for the U.S. in the World Championships in Greco-Roman. This were the aspiring Olympians, and I wrestled on that team. Were a couple of gold medalists and pretty impressive guys. And I got to go to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs and compete in the World Championships and place in the top 10 in the world. And that was just what an experience that was. It was just tremendous. And that was in Greco-Roman, which is all upper body. And something that the United States, they were trying to build their team at the time. So I had a college coach who was on the '84 Olympic team in Los Angeles as a Greco wrestler. So he helped bring me along. I actually started wrestling Greco 2 months before I made the U.S. team. So I actually was working out with some of the best guys in the country, and they were just throwing me all over the place until I learned how not to get thrown all over the place.
So you competed against the Russians as well?
I did. I competed against Russians and Ukrainians and Bulgarians and Egyptians and Japanese, and it was great. I mean, they were, and what I loved about it was where they set us up at the Olympic Training Center became my room on campus became like an international training hub. And so we were all you're given pins and all sorts of uniforms and things. And we were trading, Russian nesting dolls and big, fur caps for, Lee jeans. You have blue jeans. I give you a Russian hat for blue jeans.
Yeah, and again, we need to specify the timeline so people understand. What year was that? That was 88?
1987, I think.
Yeah.
Was that so? A little different period of time. This is the Soviet Union. They would come out and they would go, CCCP change USA. They called us USA. USA was USA. CCCP USA change.
Yeah.
And so that's how we would communicate with each other and trade stuff and create détente.
Yeah, because at that time, again, the Soviet Union had not broken up yet. 87, it was still kind of behind the Iron Curtain. The athletes were really almost the only ones that had a chance to go outside, and there's no professionalism there, at least not at that time. So they were getting paid very little money, and in order to get anything back to their country, that's what they had to do. I came in '89 when things started opening up a little bit. But yeah, 87, 88 was still that time where, unless you change or exchange something, you would have no way of getting it otherwise.
Well, it was interesting because they actually, when the Russian team came to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, they moved the U.S. team off the campus to a nearby college. So we
Okay.
were having to commute back and forth from the college, and I talked to our team managers and like, why are they doing this? This is an opportunity for all of us to connect together and create commonality. I don't understand why you're not supporting our coming together. And ultimately, they moved us back on campus, and it was amazing. It was a great experience, and we all got along tremendously well.
Yeah, it's because KGB needs to be around, and they need to make sure that people don't defect, and all sorts of things. So they needed a ring of protection around people at that time.
They didn't want a Robin Williams. I defect.
Yes. Nope. No, they did
No
not.
Moscow on the Hudson there.
Yeah. God, Robin. I love Robin. Yeah, very, very interesting time. So then, after all of that, you decided that no, I want to be an actor instead.
Well, so as it turned out, I went through basic training for the military because I thought it was a great way to serve my country and also continue wrestling, because a lot of the guys I competed against were in the military. They were Marines, they were in the Air Force, they were in the Navy, and they were allowed to compete, and that was part of their job. And they thought, yeah, you could totally do this. And I thought, this is great. I'll get paid to wrestle, and I'll serve my country, and that'll be fantastic. And I went through basic training, and I decided, you know what, it wasn't the right fit for me. So when everybody was signing their contracts, I had a really bad case of poison ivy from bivouacking through the Kentucky countryside, and I got treated, and then walked onto the bus and headed home without signing my contract. It was not there was nothing bad about it. It was just I chose not to, but I gained a great deal from that experience, and certainly encourage anybody who's interested. They should look into it, because I found it to be a wonderful experience for myself.
Yeah. So then transition.
So I decided at that time that I was going to retire from wrestling, and I always wanted to act. And I had some people who had asked me to do some things prior to that, musicals and other theater things in college, and I thought that might be a gas, and so I just did it on a whim, and really found that I loved it. And then got to New York and saw Alan Rickman, and I just said, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Wow. How interesting life works in such interesting ways that you never know where you're going, and then something turns up and you're going one way. Yeah, in my case, I was a part of the junior Ukrainian national volleyball team, and then they all continued on, and the coach took my dad aside and said, okay, well, your son can go with us because he's a Jew. And my dad said, okay, and that was the end of my volleyball career.
Oh.
So it's like these things are changing our lives in every way possible, and it's just a one little thing, right? Your coach took you aside and said you can either dive or you can be on the football team. That led you to get into world championships. Like all of these moments in life that change who we are and where we're going forever. I find that fascinating.
I know you can't write this stuff, could you? No one would believe it.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I went from volleyball to ballroom dancing, and that didn't go anywhere. Then I went to the United States. I wanted to be an actor. Then my parents said, no, we came here with no money in our pockets, so you don't have to be in Afghanistan, and you don't have to be drafted and killed there, and so you can get a better life. So like me wanting to be an actor turned out not to be a possibility, even though I was growing up wanting to be an actor, and that's all I wanted to do, and I had my whole plan. But it came to America, that changed. So like all of these things, and for you, you got into acting after wrestling. I want to ask you about House of Cards. I don't want to leave that kind of hanging before we get to kind of the whole Atlanta and Atlanta growing experience. What was your experience like on House of Cards?
Oh, it was great. I stood next to Robin Wright for 6.5 hours in 104-degree heat.
You know what? I would have braved it.
I listened. I was willing to brave the heat stroke to just be in proximity of her brilliance. I mean, she's incredibly professional. She was a lovely human being, and they worked very, very hard on that set. She had done a lot of directing by that point on the show, and so this was the first day of shooting of season 5, and we were outside Baltimore, Maryland, shooting at this kind of bombed out gas station. And the moment she walked out on set, the entire place lit up, and the crew, especially, and you can tell what an actor is like by the way the crew treats them or the way that they treat the crew. Yeah. She was beloved, and truly, I was like, okay, so this is going to be a wonderful day of watching and working alongside, one of the greats. And it was really, besides the 104-degree heat and the constant hydration and the little fans that they were giving us, because I don't sweat, I create a weather system. I mean, like it's torrential. And so everybody was being brought into this little tent with air conditioning. That broke down. Then they moved us. You had to walk about, a quarter mile to this building that had air conditioning. But by the time you walked back and forth, you were soaking. So yeah. I commandeered the SUV that that they were using to drive her up. The vice president at the time. So I just sat in the SUV, turned the car on, got the AC going, listened to the radio, and that was my little honey wagon on set for a while until everybody realized what I was doing. And then everybody started piling in the car.
Yeah, I remember talking to one of the guys who was one of the stormtroopers in, I don't know, I think the last I think 9 of Star Wars, and they were shooting in Saudi Arabia or somewhere in there, and it was ridiculously hot, and they couldn't take off all of the outfits. So basically, they were during the breaks, they were putting ice packs inside of it, and everybody was kind of helping each other out. So as soon as you mentioned that, I'm like, okay, ice packs. Where were the ice packs? Couldn't you kind of wear them underneath somewhere?
Yeah, that's where my wrestling training came in. I'm used to being in plastic suits, sweating profusely, and know how to hydrate.
My goodness. Yeah, that's yeah. Let's go to Atlanta, because you've had a chance to kind of see Atlanta and be a part of Atlanta's growth in the film industry, because I'm in the secondary market of Chicago. Chicago really had very little going on outside of theater and improv, but in terms of on screen, there was not a ton until we started getting kind of our CineSpace, and now we have sound stages, and now we have a lot of stuff that's happening. Atlanta, went through that. It just went through that before, and with Tyler Perry, building his own studio there. So tell me about Atlanta and how you had a chance to kind of be a part of it.
Well, I'll give you a little background. So among the circuitous route that my career has taken, I was the film commissioner for the state of Alabama. I worked at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. I was doing a show one day. My wife was in the current governor's administration, and so we knew the governor and first lady fairly well. As a matter of fact, I went to synagogue with the first lady, who was Jewish. You wouldn't think that Alabama would have a Jewish first lady, but there you go. And so he called me and said, "Would you like to be my film commissioner?" And I thought, wow, what a great opportunity. I have no idea what this means, but sure. And it turned out to be one of those amazing experiences where I created legislation that created incentives for the industry, lobbied it at the State House, got it passed, recruited films at Cannes and Sundance. And so I really got a great sense of the economic development aspect of the film industry and the jobs that it creates and the revenue that it generates for the states. So now let's fast forward. 2008 in Georgia, who was always a great competitor of Alabama's and always just eating Alabama's lunch in terms of the film industry, they passed an incentives package that is a tax credit incentive without a ceiling. So the amount of money that they can credit doesn't have a ceiling, so they can bring in a lot of funds. Now remember, in 2008, that's right at the downturn of the Great Recession. So all of a sudden, these big box retailers are out of business, and there's all this empty big box space. So the film industry is plugging along, and at that time, unlike a pandemic, the film industry was recession-proof. It proven not to be pandemic proof, but certainly recession proof. And so this tax credit goes into effect at the time Georgia's generating, a few $100 million in the industry. Production companies come in, they take over these big boxes. Now, as a former film commissioner, I can tell you, I turned a Gaffer's warehouse into the sound stage for the movie Big Fish that Tim Burton directed. So I knew how these things worked. And so they come in, they take over these big box empty spaces, and they start putting productions up. So fast forward 5 years, they go from a few $100 million to about $3 billion in economic impact. And now we're in, let's say we're close to 2015, and Pinewood Studios says we're going to build our North American facility in Fayetteville, Georgia. And along with that comes a Marvel franchise. So all of the Avengers movies, a number of the Spider-Man movies, which Spider-Man 3 is being shot here right now, and that starts to pick up. So now our industry goes from $3.5 billion a year to close to $10 billion a year in economic impact. Because now all of these productions from all over the country and all over the world are seeing the economic benefit of shooting in Georgia and the ease of shooting in the state. Because one, you've got one of the busiest airports in the world coming through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The ease to get around, and just the value of as far as the dollar goes. So now production companies are getting upfront money from this tax credit, so they're not hemorrhaging the money that they've raised to make the film from the studios or other venture capital funds, and they're able to make their movie cheaper and more efficient. And there are already some sound stages that are here, but now sound stages are going up left and right. So now there are 100 sound stages in and around the Atlanta area, and major league productions, some of the biggest budget blockbusters of the last decade are coming out of Atlanta. So the industry growing on itself exponentially. Right now, you look at what COVID is doing to Los Angeles, they've had to shut down. Now we're about 85, 90% at capacity in Georgia right now. So we're doing the most production. The difference is in Georgia is like, it's like a catering hall. We've got the space that we can rent out, and we can do it at an economical rate. What needs to happen is content creation really needs to start coming out of the Southeast, and particularly Georgia, for the industry to truly grow and sustain itself. And that's the next step, I think, in the evolution of this industry. And we're starting to see that, as you mentioned, Tyler Perry, he produces a ton of content out of his studio facility. It's an amazing facility. I've had the pleasure of working on it several times. And, so that's where we are. That's basically the story of the kind of Georgia film industry in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And then from acting perspective, hopefully it then goes to a point of you don't have to be LA or New York based in order to get starring roles. And then again, that's where Atlanta actors can start growing in that, same as Chicago actors in our community.
Right. Yeah. Well, Chicago's got some great actors. I have a number of friends who came out of that the Chicago acting scene are still there, and people I respect immensely. So it's a great town.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Thank you for that history. That's amazing. So when did you stop being the Alabama commissioner, and how did you get involved in the Georgia side of it at any point?
Well, my family, my wife and children are all born in Alabama, so I've got my heart is in Dixie, and we moved from the capital, Montgomery, to Birmingham for about 7 years, and at this time had been out of the industry for a while. But when we left Montgomery, and when the Democratic governor who we both worked for did not get reelected for a second term, we both obviously left the administration, and we moved to Birmingham, and then I was out of the business for the next 7.5, 8 years, working in marketing and public relations, and really just gaining some skills that I've been able to use since I got back into acting. And that happened about 11 and a half years ago when we moved from Alabama to Atlanta. We just happened to land in Atlanta at the perfect moment for me to get back into acting.
Yeah, maybe it had something to do with it. You saw all the things that were going on, and you was like, yeah, I want to, do that again.
Exactly.
Fascinating. As we wrap up, because I know you and I can talk for a long time, but the YouTube viewers prefer for my shows to be shorter than I want them to be. So as we wrap up, looking at your career and looking at the many twists and turns that it took, if you went back and talked to your 17-year-old self and gave one piece of advice, what would that be?
That's a great question. I think the advice would be you're okay. You just being, you don't have to be anybody but who you are. Embrace who you are, the good, bad, and the ugly, and then continue to be the good person you are. Live with your self-doubts, but even in the face of that, know that you're okay. I mean, it's pretty simple advice, nothing major. Just take care of yourself and be okay with yourself.
Well, simple is what's remembered. Simple stays, and simple gets to the heart of it. So I like simple.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brian. It's been fascinating. I want to have you on again so we can continue this, because I know that there are a lot more nuggets that you have at your disposal that we need to know about. I really appreciate it.
Well, I think it's like I made a new friend today. As a guy who's approaching double nickels, it's hard to make new friends at 55, and it's nice when you meet people that you can have a nice conversation with and have some shared interests.
Thank you. Likewise, absolutely. Let's stay in touch. I feel absolutely the same. I'm going to be 46 in a few months, so I have a little bit of room until I get to double nickels. But yeah, I do feel that way. It's interesting. On that note, I have an 11-year-old son, and I was having this conversation with him. I seem to bring up my son at every one of the episodes that I have, which I think he's enjoying. Maybe people find it annoying, but there is a point to this. I was having a conversation about friends, and being at 11, friend groups are kind of all in flux, and he was saying, look, I don't have a best friend, and he was really sad about that. And I said, well, let's think of it. I have two best friends. One of them I met when I was 15. The other one I met when I was 33. So, getting your friends and close friends and best friends doesn't automatically mean that you have to get them when you're 5 or 7 years old. But that's going to happen all throughout your life. So now, at 45 or almost 46, I have another friend. So the trend continues.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. This has been a joy, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to everybody for tuning in to another episode of The Love of Acting. I hope you're as fascinated by this conversation as I am. And please post your comments. Please follow Brian. We'll have all of his information right below this video. Thank you.
So long.